how long do we say it's reasonable to say people can continue trying to hold back the sea for? And when do we pull the plug? Who's left holding the hot potato there?
Welcome back to Action Hour with the Whidbey Environmental Action Network. This episode is part 2 of a 3-part conversation that I had with Marianne and Steve about 3 laws that have environmental impact in the state of Washington. In the last episode, we covered the State Environmental Policy Act, and in this episode, we will cover the Shoreline Management Act. Take a listen. So, all right, where do we want to go next? To the Shoreline Management Act?
Shoreline Management Act. Shoreline Management Act was initially adopted by initiative.
Oh, okay. What does that mean?
That means the people of the state gathered signatures equal to 10% of the voters in the last gubernatorial election, put it on the ballot, and the people voted for it. That's
okay. So the people voted for it. That's cool.
Same way marijuana got semi-legalized in Washington.
Okay.
Typically, the political dynamics are that when an issue is very hot and heavy and controversial, the politicians are adverse to addressing it. So ultimately, the people do.
Okay, so it was hot and heavy at this time. It's interesting because I also like the beginning of this act, where it says the legislature finds that the shorelines of the state are among the most valuable and fragile of its natural resources, and that there is great concern throughout the state relating to their utilization, protection, restoration, and preservation.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. With that said, there has always been tension with the Shoreline Management Act because it simultaneously greatly restricts or requires review of industrial actions on the shoreline. Mm-hmm. It gives a preference to single-family residential development. Okay. And to put this in historical context, too, remember, it was not until the 1960s that Washington State finally prohibited hydraulicking. You know, people coming in with barges and water jets, water cannons to blast the hillsides of bluffs, to create developable land below. And that is how many of Whidbey's prime shoreline developments happen. That's how, what am I thinking of? The one with the...
What, Mutiny Bay?
Mutiny Bay. That's how Mutiny Bay happened. That whole thing there, that was a marsh.
Really?
Behind it. So if these people are wondering why are we having trouble with sea level rise now, it's because they were never really above sea level.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. So basically they blasted the side of the bluff to create a beach to then put houses on.
You see this in a lot of places. You can see it a little bit north of Clinton. There's some areas.
Dock going up Brighton Beach and...
Was Brighton Beach hydraulic?
Parts of it.
Yeah,
yes.
Parts of Brighton Beach. And you go a little north of there, and there's some places. And so, I mean, these places are completely indefensible from sea level rise. They're at sea level, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're at the previous sea level.
So that kind of puts it in context of of some of the pressures that were causing the Shoreline Management Act to get passed. Under the Shoreline Management Act, counties and cities adopt Shoreline Master Programs, SMPs, versus the SMAs. Mm-hmm. And
the hearing on the review and update and adoption of the updated is
tomorrow, but this won't be out tomorrow. So
no, it won't be out tomorrow. Yeah, but we can talk about the fact that that Island County is in the process of, is it amendments to the Shoreline Master Program?
update them every 10 years.
Update. So this is the normal process.
It's to be updated every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to adopt the update on February 6th, and a whole lot of us submitted a whole lot of comments, and they decided not to and gave themselves until March 19. And we have not seen the revisions that were involved, but I've got some fairly sharp.
Anyway, so the way this is structured, you have the Shoreline Management Act. That's the state level law.
Okay.
Counties and cities must adopt their Shoreline Master Programs, which are the real development regulations for the shoreline.
Okay.
Those are reviewed by the Department of Ecology, and the department, after the counties and cities adopt them, the Department of Ecology must approve those.
Okay. So the Department of Ecology approves all of the Shoreline Master Programs for each county.
Yes, and of course there is a possible appeal from different directions, different parties. And under the Shoreline Management Act, some kinds of shoreline approvals that the county might do actually also have to get approved by the Department of Ecology.
Okay. What does a Shoreline Master Program have to include?
Okay, so basically it's got to include, it's almost like the zoning for the shoreline and all the development regulations for the shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's going to happen in the shoreline there.
Okay, Steve, define shoreline, 200 feet.
Yes, the shoreline management zone is 200 feet landward of the ordinary high water mark. And then and associated wetlands that are in that area and then extend further out. Though counties, including Ione County, have taken drawing this line and saying this is the shoreline regulations. Here we're outside the shoreline jurisdiction, so it's now under the GMA regulations. And after GMA was adopted, there was a period of time when it was really confusing which governed. There were some court cases like that. So the legislature finally did something that was more or less sensible. They basically made the Shoreline Management Act a whole separate part of the Growth Management Act. So the Shoreline Management Act now is in many ways just a part of GMA governing that specific area, but it has its own particular regulations.
Okay. All right. So it's like a satellite of the Growth Management Act, but it came 20 years prior to it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the model that ought to be done with forestry, with logging.
Okay. But you're saying right now forestry is not included in the growth. Okay.
It's sacrosanct. It's,
Mm-hmm. We will have to talk about that probably for its own episode.
Yeah, it will probably take an episode on that.
Yeah.
So Ione County is now doing its update of its Shoreline Master Program. And it's running the same problem that, every other coastal jurisdiction has, and some of those that are on big rivers, which is that what the hell do we do about climate change?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the problem here is that the way the Shoreline Management Act is written and the way the regulations are written, there's kind of an assumption of things being fairly static, Okay, so people build on the shoreline and they're getting flooded now because X, Y, Z, whatever. Can they put in a seawall or something? Mm-hmm. Well, now you have the whole extra layer over that of if they put in a seawall, besides all the effects of that, all the negative effects of that,
right?
How long is that seawall going to be good for? Mm-hmm. Are we saying, they're going to be able to do, a bunch of environmental damage, but it's only going to protect their property for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What is a reasonable amount of time? Since we know that sea levels are going to continue rising for hundreds of years now.
Mm-hmm. What is the scope? So like the Shoreline Master Programs, because you're saying this, that like if somebody is allowed to, in the, I guess, land use practices of the Shoreline Management Act, if they're allowed to build these seawalls, like what is the responsibility of a Shoreline Master Program in terms of its scope timeline scope? Like, is it supposed to be thinking for the next 100 years, for the next 200 years?
There's really nothing in there, nothing in Washington law, really anywhere that says, how are we going to look at this in terms of just what happens in the next 10 years before it's updated again? Or are we going to, in terms of if you're building that house on the shoreline now, that house's expected lifespan is what, 100 years?
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that place going to be underwater in 100 years?
Mm-hmm.
So should it be allowed to be built if it's going to be underwater in 80 years? What about 50 years, 20 years, 10 years? Now, in terms of new construction, that's all important issues. But in terms of these existing problem areas, that becomes even more so when you think about it in terms of it's a game of hot potato. Who is going to be left holding the hot potato at the end? In this case, a shoreline development or whatever that is indefensible, that they're not going to be able to get insurance on because insurance companies are going, hey, we don't want to give insurance on a place that's going to get washed away in 10 years. We're not going to get our insurance money back. And that's really typically been the case a lot of times with coastal development. That's why you've got the National Flood Insurance Program. It becomes the insurer of last result with some really bizarre results in places. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard about places in the Mississippi River floodplain, where they've been washed away 10 times in 40 or 50 years, and they get to rebuild every time. And the law, that federal law was, I'm not sure if it still is, but was written so that you could only rebuild in the same footprint and you could only rebuild the same type,
Right. It doesn't even allow for upgrades or for you to better, protect your home when you rebuild. This
is really fairly typical. And the times when people have taken the long view and they've accomplished something that way, actually been able to get through the bureaucracy and everything else and gotten appropriations to do something, are so unusual that they're striking. There's a place in the Mississippi River floodplain, the town just kept getting washed away. And they finally said, look, how about you give us the damn flood insurance money and we relocate up on that bluff.
Right. Right.
And they were finally able to get a special appropriation from Congress to do that. That happened with Hamilton, Washington on the Skagit River. It was always getting flooded out every year. I mean, it was just continual, and finally, Patty Murray was able to get money out of Congress to relocate the town.
Right. Which would be, I think, I'm curious because it seems like that would be what you're describing. The relocation process is maybe what would be a part of a managed retreat process from the shorelines of relocating people who currently live in zones that are going to be flooded over and over again, with the knowledge that that is going to continually happen over time. But does the shoreline, like what does you're saying that our current shoreline management program, though, is only really considering the next 10 years?
Both the Shoreline Management Act and generally, and our individual Shoreline Master Program don't even say anything about how long, for example, if you're doing, a seawall, how long it has to be effective for.
Right.
Now that's the kind of situation where SEPA come into play. Okay. What are cumulative and long-term environmental impacts here?
Right. Okay. And so that's how SEPA might interact with the SMA and the master programs of counties, is that you have to potentially do an environmental impact statement when making adjustments to your shoreline master program. And
the landowner and property owners might have to if they're going to put in a seawall.
Right. Well, and that would be through a permitting process, right? Yes. That you would put in a request for a permit for your seawall, and then you'd have to do an environmental impact statement
Steve,
Right.
I want to get into
And-
the 3-year retrospective versus prospective.
Yeah,
Oh, what does that mean?
I don't want to get too deep into the specifics of seawall, coastal armoring, if you will, permitting. But under the current county regulations, you have to show, based on a trend analysis, that the property will be impacted within 3 years if you don't do the armoring.
Okay.
Now that's a trend analysis, and the trend analysis has to go back at least 10 years.
No,
And
3 years.
the trend analysis.
Yeah,
But the trend analysis had to show that the structure will be hit by the erosion, the coastal erosion, within 3 years.
yeah. And
Trend erosion has to go back at least 10, but generally more. Now, trend analyses are great, historical trend analyses, and that's what the FEMA maps, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has always used for their floodplain mapping. The problem is we've got a situation now where that historical trend is no longer this kind of, flat line or even a linear thing, a linear line. Instead, it's becoming this, rapidly increasing curve. So there's a move afoot to use predictive analysis. That's the kind of thing where you say, given sea level rise, what is the probability that this place will be flooded or will be hit by storm surge within 10 years, within 20 years, within 50 years, based on what we know. Further out you go there, the less precise, you can predict. But that's certainly better than dealing with a trend, doing a trend analysis with historical data where the current conditions are changing rapidly. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I feel like I got a little lost.
Okay, so let's say you're looking at here's a fairly typical example.
Yeah.
How is the beach eroding every year? Will it erode enough in the next 3 years so that a landowner can justify putting in a seawall to stop that erosion from reaching their house? Whether it's their own house or whether it's a second home, which we have many in Island County. Okay, so you go back 20 years and you say, back then the shore was X feet out. Now it's, Y feet closer. So Y minus X divided by the number of years, and that's our trend per year. Does that, okay, I'm simplifying obviously, but.
Yeah. But of course the historical trend.
But now,
this isn't I get it. Cause you're saying that the historical trend analysis isn't actually going to be as accurate because of the rate of change and the rate of sea level rise. And so the predictive analysis.
What if you take that trend analysis and you overlay it by saying, okay, within that amount of time, we're expecting sea level rise of X amount. And storm surges typically would take that extra amount and convert that into how much, is the storm surge going to be. So the real nub of this is that the current county commissioners, though I'm sure they would rather not have to deal with this, are going to be the ones who are going to have to address, how long do we say it's reasonable to say people can continue trying to hold back the sea?
Right.
And when do we pull the plug? Who's left holding the hot potato there?
Right. And are they having to consider this in the Shoreline Master Program, or is this just something as
they are right now? This is front footer, and their options are address it squarely, wiggle waggle, or just punt. The latter being the first instinct of any politician, of course. I'll be out of office someday, and maybe we can just continue going with this, and whoever's in office next, they can deal with it.
Right.
Okay.
But this is the central issue of the current Shoreline Master Program
It is
update.
the central issue. And an interesting thing here is that because if you count sea level rise, you're certainly going to end up with a conclusion that many of these coastal properties are going to be uninhabitable, in the near future. Certainly within the lifespan of the existing structures. And a lot of those places that are undeveloped still, you look at and you go, they shouldn't be developed. Okay. So that's the logical conclusion using predictive analysis. And using predictive analysis, you can say that, these places on the shoreline that people want to put armoring on now will be affected. They will be affected. But if you use the trend analysis, well, no, they're not necessarily going to be hit within 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use the predictive analysis, yeah, they probably will be, or there's a good chance of it anyway, and certainly pretty soon. So think of it this way. Let's say you're a realtor or a property owner of a coastal property that is undeveloped, and you would like to be able to sell that for the big bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sell for the big bucks if there's a prediction this thing is going to be underwater in 10 years? Probably not.
No. And
So-
this speaks to the trend or the change, right? Because what you're talking about is like because up until now, coastal property has been high barrier to entry, high priced property because of its relationship to the water and the view.
Right.
Yeah.
But let me continue here because so that property owner would probably just as soon have trend analysis.
Right.
Because, and they certainly don't want something like a notice on the title saying this area is likely to get washed away in, a certain amount of time. Okay, but consider, say, the people at Mutiny Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're getting flooded out regularly. Well, not surprisingly, they basically, that place never was more than barely above sea level. Seas have increased now.
Mm-hmm.
Weather storm surges and those kind of things have increased, in magnitude. That's a question. But certainly, sea level has risen. They are getting flooded much, much more now, much more regularly. They want to armor it to keep that from happening. Predictive analysis doesn't support trend analysis doesn't support that, but predictive analysis would. So they would have predictive analysis.
Uh-huh.
See that, demographics that usually you would think might be on the same side are not necessarily, depending on the particular context they find themselves in.
Does the state have to use trend or predictive analysis? Is there some type of standard around what type of analysis?
Not a standard at this point, but the major push is to switch to predictive analysis, which is logical. I mean, it's scientifically much more supportable now.
Right.
Okay. But the overall question here, that nub of a question of how long do we continue to hold back the sea?
Yeah.
That's left holding the hot potato. And this is not just Island County, obviously. And there have been some truly what I think harebrained ideas about this. In California, there was a proposal that the state buy up coastal properties, high-end coastal properties, and rent them back to the owners. Somehow this was going to result in the owners neither the owners nor the state getting, ending up holding the hot potato. Didn't really pencil out any way you looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, most of the work looking at sea level rise and its effects on coastal areas tends to stop the minute, the insurance runs out. The insurance companies turn tail and run and say, no way are we insuring this place, And after that, everybody just assumes, oh, the poor landowner, they're left holding the bag, they're out of there. And people think that's just it. but it's not, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of coastal structures out there already that are going to become derelict hulks, getting swallowed by the sea, polluting the coastal area. And that's going to have a huge impact in itself, in terms of both on the tax base, in terms of the pollution, in terms of the value of those coastal areas. And by value, I don't just mean monetary, I mean for recreation, fishing, all that too. And so far, all the agencies, all the governmental establishments are really avoiding that one. You don't want to look at that at all, because to deal with that, you're either going to have to make the judgment that the government's going to be on the hook to pick up the tab for all those. So a rational property owner is not going to. Your house got flooded out for the third time in 10 years. The insurance company says, here's your money. Goodbye. We don't want to talk to you anymore. Okay. And the property owner says, well, I'm not going to rebuild this. I'm walking away from it. Okay. So who's left holding the hot potato? Then it's the people in the form of the government.
Right.
Have to somehow come up with millions and millions of dollars to deal with this problem. Or the government could step in sooner and say something like, coastal property owners need to start paying into an insurance pool set aside solely for removing the structures when, you're out of there.
So you attended the session on coastal insurance, and they were discussing this very issue.
Yes.
And we now have the book. By the way, I've ordered it. It's coming, A Blueprint for Coastal Adaptation, which will certainly help us. And then in the last few days, there was a story, a national story, to the effect that people at Massachusetts, right by Connecticut, a coastal community, they gathered up $500,000 to replenish the sand that had washed away from their shore. And in 3 days, a storm came in and wiped out all of that sand. And
800 tons or something.
anyway, the upshot is that here are these, and from the image I saw, those are upscale houses that are now all at risk, and they're now screaming, government must do something for us. So once again, these people have had the benefit of some very nice living for a long time. And now when the going gets rough, government must do something for us. And government is all of us.
Yeah, it is all of us. Well, we're the people, right? The people. I think that the issue with this for me is that if we are asking people to buy into collective consciousness about ecosystems and about preservation, about the environment, that I think that the likely outcome is that the people are going to assume the cost of even, wealthy individuals' high-end coastal homes, because it just seems like the only outcome to me is that the government's going to have to clean up the mess, unfortunately. And in Washington state, my personal preference would be for us to invoke public trust doctrine, take back the coastline, and then pay everybody to leave their house and just demolish it before it goes underwater. Right?
Which would be ever so logical, but, and here we go round and round again, the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says, nor shall private property be taken for public purposes without just compensation.
Right. Well, you pay them for their house, pay them market value for their house.
And how much do you want to pay in taxes?
I mean, I feel like it would have to be a federal program, and we allocate so much money towards, I don't know, the military, for example.
It's true.
If you were to I don't know what percentage, but it probably wouldn't even be a very high percentage of public funds that are I mean, we the public are funding all kinds of wars that I don't agree with, right? I would.
Well, the Pentagon budget is somewhere between somewhere between 775 billion and a trillion.
Right.
Per year.
Right. And so, and we're funding that, right? Like there's so many things that we, the public, our money goes towards. And I feel like clearing the coastlines before the disaster strikes would be a worthy investment for all of us. Yeah.
But there are many very, very powerful interests that absolutely do not want that because it is their cash cow. Consider, for example, a county government is facing pressures both from the fact that these are its most valuable taxing base. And as development moves back from the shoreline, it's just not going to be worth as much in terms of taxation for various reasons, including which somebody back in the 1990s stopped them from zoning the entire shoreline for 3.5 houses per acre. So the development density is less. That's going to mean less taxes. They're politicians. That means they're certainly, to a certain extent, this is going to vary depending on the place and time, but they are certainly enthralled to development interests. And developers, being economically rational, would, generally a developer would rather build a big, expensive place because they make more than a small place. I mean, the housing crisis, I think, pretty well demonstrates that conclusively. I mean, there's a reason developers don't build, workforce or low income housing. They don't make much on it.
Right. And you're saying that so the economic incentive is not necessarily there for large interest groups, including county governments that get a greater amount of taxes from people who live on shorelines.
People actually on the coast there, why should they leave until they absolutely have to? So you've got all these in place. Now, I mean, there are a number of steps that local governments could do that none of them are doing, but they include some fairly obvious things like using predictive analysis to say that if you're going to build a new place on the coast, then you have to elevate it X amount so that, it's not going to get flooded out.
What are you going to do about septic and utilities?
You're going to have to deal with that too. I mean, in some countries like the Netherlands, they're actually doing some very interesting things technologically about this. For instance, houses that are basically floating and rise on piers. So, there are some technological solutions here. They are not in keeping with the idea of a 6,000 square foot coastal mansion.
Right.
Which is certainly the trend.
Right. And what is the Shoreline Management Act in its current form doesn't address this?
Doesn't any of this. It takes it on an individual short-term basis. So, for instance, up at Deception Pass, which is a case currently in appeal in the county, you have a situation where there are coastal dunes. The people have built either on the dunes or right behind them. Right behind them, it actually goes down a little bit. So they're pretty much at sea level with the dunes in between. And behind them's the road. Behind them are some more lots and a road and a coastal marsh, which is also probably rising. So, I don't know anybody's been monitoring that in particular. And so their situation is that the dunes are getting eroded by these big storms. Leave aside the whole question of how you predict whether or not that's going to be happening in 3 years. Is their place going to get flooded, or is the place going to get flooded or not? Under our current regulations, they can put up a wall to stop erosion. They can't put up a wall to stop flooding.
Okay.
Okay. So you've got that. But then there's also 2 lots there that are currently undeveloped. Some clever soul, when they were writing the Island County Shoreline Master Program, had a provision in there that platted lots that are undeveloped cannot be armored, which is great, except these lots weren't platted.
Okay, remind me what platted means.
Subdivided.
Subdivided.
But they were never platted, unless you want to make a legal argument that they were, that might or might not hold. So, potentially, these people could get to put in their shoreline armoring, their version of it. And these currently undeveloped lots are then worth a whole lot.
And they can do this for erosion, but not flooding.
Yeah, but it's still just passing the hot potato. Same thing at Mutiny Bay. I'm going to make I guess you could call it, I'm going to make kind of a predictive bet here that a lot of those homes are second homes. In fact, I don't know, maybe most of them.
They are. I checked.
Okay, so most of them are second homes probably.
Okay.
And, those property owners are getting flooded out pretty continuously now. They've spent a big pile of money, so far, and they still haven't gotten their armoring, but they're going to keep trying, of course, and they may or may not succeed. I mean, part of what happens with Island County Shoreline Master Program update here is going to determine whether or not they get to armor or not. So, if they get to do that, I'm going to predict that many of them are going to be unloading that hot potato onto some other poor sucker. And there's nothing in the, Shoreline Master Program or Shoreline Management Act that says in situations like this, the county should establish, whether or not they will allow the seawall to get raised again or not. And they should disclose that on the property title.
Actually, we've got a case over on Camino. The seawall is old. He just rebuilt his entire house, ripped his house down to the ground, built a new house in exactly the same footprint, and now he wants to raise the seawall.
Okay, so I don't know if you can hear that, but Marianne reports a situation on Camino Island where the seawall is really old and decrepit, basically, needs to either let go or replace. Somebody's house there was old and decrepit, one of the old beach cabins, maybe, the quintessential beach cabin from the 30s or 40s, tore it down, built something new and spiffy in the same footprint. And so now he wants to rebuild the seawall. He
just wants to raise it 18 inches.
He just wants to raise it 18 inches, And a lot of these coastal properties, they generally tend to come in two varieties of shape that I've seen. One is the long spaghetti strip. 60 feet, 100 feet is a wide one relatively. Some of these are like, down to like 30 feet or even 20 feet.
No, the narrowest are 30.
The narrowest are 30. Okay. And there's these long spaghetti strips that go back 1,000 feet.
Nah.
Or 100 or 200.
200 is typical.
200 is pretty typical. Yeah. So they go back a long ways, good ways. And on some of those, maybe they'll go back enough you could move the house if the house was designed to be moved, which most of these are not at all. And the other ones are just these, little blocks that might be, 30 by 60 or 100 by 100. And they're just right on the shore. They're just right there. And that's what you get. And there really isn't anywhere to move the house back.
Right.
Now, you could elevate it maybe, except most of these structures were not built with that in mind. There's some pretty obvious things the county could require now for at least any new development is that the structure be designed to be elevated if it needs to be, or elevated now. It can be designed so it can be moved, the whole structure, or it be designed so it can be dismantled easily. So when the time comes, you're not only not losing all those materials, but You can dismantle it and move it, which is going to be easier than bringing in a wrecking ball and tearing it all down and, having huge new landfills full of construction debris.
Well, this is interesting because as you're saying all this and you're talking about what we're talking about right now is sea level rise, erosion, the future of the coastline, right? Basically that and how people can and how they are not preparing for this inevitable future where a lot of these properties are no longer going to be inhabitable. And the question is, are we going to have structures that are just ocean garbage? Are we going to have people who are planning to move their houses if they can? There are going to be certain lots that are just going to be completely underwater. And in the interim, you have people who are trying to armor their properties through bulkhead permitting if they can. A bulkhead being a hard armoring, which is not conservation friendly, right? As far as I understand, it is not. That actually doesn't do anything to preserve ecosystems, which we haven't even really talked about when we're talking about the shoreline. We're talking about development and people and erosion and sea level rise, and not even the animals or the organisms or the plants that are being impacted by all of these happenings. And I'm curious, when the SMA was written in 1971, obviously none of this was.
Nobody thought about any of this. Nobody knew about it.
Oh.
And the reality is that, so now we're in a situation where our legal and our social and our political structure are encountering something that's really new, or at least is recognizing this new stressor. And the result is mostly, I could call it a reticence, but I'll just say it's mostly desire not to have to confront it, because some people are going to benefit, some are going to lose. The people at Mutiny Bay, if they get to raise their seawall now, then they benefit by having their places for a little longer and maybe being able to unload them. Now, if the county was to propose something like, we'll permit this, but only if there's a notice on the title, no more seawall raising, you would hear so much political blowback.
Mm-hmm.
It would be really intense. Mm-hmm. So all this kind of, it's really just another way of sticking your head in the sand about all this, that our political, legal system and social system is predicated on nature being this static thing, this kind of static background that we impose our, whatever we're imposing on it.
Right. Instead of it being dynamic and active and changing rapidly.
Right. And it's imposing on us. And it's a situation where you can't beat it for all kinds of reasons. Yeah, you could build a 50-foot seawall all the way around Whidbey Island. But, there's only so much money in the world. And when Congress acts, are they more likely to protect Whidbey Island? Or are they more likely to maybe protect New York City?
Mm-hmm. Which is also being flooded.
Which is also being flooded. So this is just, one little drip in the bucket here.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, shoreline owners tend to, be wealthier. I mean, the family inherited the beach house and it's their, 24-foot driftwood shack. That's wonderful, but there's not very many places like that out there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Maybe in Louisiana, like when we were in that webinar talking about, there are coastal communities that are working class communities.
You want to talk about equity then? Should we be helping those people, relocate or whatever, adapt, whatever's necessary, because they really don't have the resources, or people with second homes on the coast of Whidbey Island?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in terms of social justice terms, the answer is obvious. In economic terms, it's probably a wash. In political terms, it's kind of out there waiting to be decided.
Right. Okay. So what else do we want to say or tell people about the Shoreline Management Act, or do we want to move on to the GMA? to our because I think these are going to be broken up.
I hope so.
I think, I've decided as we're having this conversation that each of these is going to be their own episode because I kind of thought this is how it would happen, would be that
spans nowadays.
Yeah.
If they can't read a sentence more than 147 characters or whatever.
People also get tired after about 45 minutes, especially when it's new information. I feel like it's a lot, and but this is all good stuff. Marianne, do you have anything you want to say about anything right now?
Not, diving into GMA, that may end up being 2 45-minute sessions, but let's see how far we get. It's a big, big issue.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every home gun, every profit. And kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards to just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. Unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEEN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician and WEEN board member, Nathaniel Talbot, for letting us use his track, Intuition, from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
At the workplace, every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now